Matt. He is a tour de force, and I know this is going to be an absolute inspiring treat for everyone. And just a brief intro to Matt. Matt Ball is a mental health and nurse practitioner. He's the director of the Humane Clinic and has become internationally recognised for his work about, forgive me for mispronouncing this, Matt, dissociatic approach. And absolutely other transformational work, including his work around a recently developed narrative suicide model, which I'd really be interested to hear more of. So over to you, Matt.
Hi, thanks, Akima. Hello, everybody, and yeah, thanks for me. I'm just going to share my slides. Okay, well, look, thank you, Akima. You're a bit of a heroine of mine after meeting you in February. Before I go on, I'm speaking from the lands of the Ghana people, which is in the Adelaide Plains region, and I just want to acknowledge where I am and pay my respects to elders past, present and emergent there, and all Indigenous and First Nations people around the world. Much of what I'm saying isn't new, it's just being respoken in my words. And a couple of other things. Indy, I love you, you're amazing. And if, Indy, you can make up new words and diagnoses today, I'm going to tell everyone about a new word of my own, but also it reminded me of a new diagnosis me and my friend Cole made up called trihopenia. And we decided that it should be tri instead of bi, because everything's kind of bipolar. There's two sides. And we thought if we just throw another one in, that would make it more fun. And then we thought it would be hopeful to make up labels. And then penia, we came from with, like, we just wanted to give reference to the penis and to Sigmund Freud for some reason. So that's my new disorder of the day, trihopenia. And one other thing, I represented someone at a community treatment order legal hearing today, and the person, the order wasn't upheld. And I just want to encourage anyone and everyone to support someone when there's a legal system bashing against them under the name of psychiatric diagnosis. That's not what I'm talking about, but it was exciting. So look, I'm just going to talk a little bit about a theory or an approach that I've made and come up with, but try and contextualize really that it's my view, my experience of lived experience and people that I meet and spend time with, that when someone is in an extreme or altered state, which is often labeled as psychosis, actually that's what we've got to be in relationship with one another. Whatever is between us is how we relate. And we like to relate by being close, talking, connecting in ways that makes it easy for both of us. But in this, my experience has been that often a person puts an extreme state in between us as a way of offering an opportunity for connection. So I'll explain a bit about that. Just touching on the idea of seeing the non-psychosis that we share. And really all this is talking about is that, and I'm not going to do air quotes for psychosis every time. I don't believe in the narrative of psychosis, of course. But what I'm interested in here is that we have to get rid of someone who is in an extreme state. We have to get rid of the extreme state because they expose us to the fact that we too could have that experience. So there is no difference in them and I, other than the way they're expressing what's going on in this moment between us. And if we can come to terms with that, it was what Lang talked about, facing our sort of shared ontological insecurity leads us to these extreme states. And this is what I'm talking about today. And what I'm saying is that if we can find a coexisting same experience, an experience where we can share our own different realities of the same moment without threat to each other, then there'll be an evaporation of the extreme states because they won't need to exist in order for us to connect more safely. So I'm going to explain a bit of that. Some of this is important. This model and this idea comes from the idea that really our goal as a supporter, a loved one, a connected person is to just try and create right understanding, the reality of what is, without intention to change it, without a goal, and with the acceptance that it will change by itself. And one of the things mental health services love to do, and anyone supporting anyone, is to come up with goals and ideas of how to help someone. And I was talking to a colleague today who said, I want to bring some work I've been doing to you and talk about it because I was really worried about it until recently. And what she described was this really beautiful experience of helping someone share their story. And in the middle of that, the guy started saying what he wanted to do with his life. And she realized that it wasn't really risky at all. And I thought it was a great example of when we start setting goals, it's for me that I'm setting goals. It's not because I'm in relationship and supporting the emerging narrative of the other person. And that's a lot of what this is about. So the interconnectedness comes from non-goal, coexisting, human-to-human relationship and the creation of love and mutuality. And if you're someone that's in or around the mental health services, have a look and see how often we mention love, because there's not enough mention of the fact that it's something that's common to us all, but we don't see that as something we should be offering in health services a lot of the time. Probably this audience do, but many don't. So what do we have to do? Well, there's going to be a bit of reference to Lang today. And Lang said the therapist must have the plasticity to transpose himself into another strange and even alien view of the world. In this act, he draws on his own psychotic possibilities without foregoing his sanity. Only thus can he arrive at an understanding of the patient's existential position. So I have to expose myself to what's happening here now in order to be able to be in the same space and connected world as the other. And this is where the transformation and healing can begin, when we can come into that space together. We might see the rituals and the creativity that be called an extreme state as understanding the liminal person who's using this to come back into connection. And that's what I'm talking about. The person is offering us what they've got to be in relationship and connection with us. So instead of seeing these experiences as opportunities to label and make someone more liminal, sit them outside the structures of the rest of society, we can see them as a way for me to be invited into their world and the relationship with them, and then vice versa. So I just wanted to read you a little poem from Lang's. I know there's a theme of the poetry coming up, and I just wanted to read you this poem from Knots, because I think it explains very well what happens. And I'm going to read it as though this is a person, as Lang did, that was living through the experience of what was being called schizophrenia. But I'm suggesting this is true also of anyone supporting someone in distress. And this is why we are mutual in these spaces. There is no one person who's sick or wrong or ill or problematic. There is only what we have between us. There is something I don't know that I am supposed to know. I don't know what it is I don't know, and yet am supposed to know. And I feel I look stupid if I seem both not to know it and know what it is, and not know what it is I don't know. Therefore, I pretend to know it. This is nerve-wracking, since I don't know what I must pretend to know. Therefore, I pretend to know everything. I feel you know what I'm supposed to know, but you can't tell me what it is, because you don't know that I don't know what it is. You may know what I don't know, but not that I don't know it. And I can't tell you, so you will have to tell me everything. And I think that broadly sums up psychiatric diagnosis. I'll tell you because neither of us know, so I'll make something up, and as I have power over you, I can do that. So what is the current state? And this is really important before I go on to describe dissocioquetic as an idea. And I'm going to show a slide in a minute, and forgive me for any Australians that this is really difficult for, but I wanted to talk about the current state as I see it. There's a lot of talk when I'm speaking in my circles in systems of, oh no, things are changing, things are getting better. I even hear people from the UK saying, I think Australia's a long way ahead of the rest of the world. And that was certainly the mythology that was given to me in 2005, 6, 7, 8 when I was doing my nurse training. But the reality is that the current state in South Australia and in Australia is that diagnosis, medication, community treatment orders and inpatient stays are the main approach to mental health services. Psychiatry leads, and psychiatry leads badly. Psychiatry advises the government. Nobody else gets room at the table. And at every opportunity, other opportunities are blocked. So the current state is a problem. And why is it a problem? Well, diagnosis means that we dehumanize people. In this quote here, it says, the degree to which healthcare professionals engage in dehumanization depends critically on the professional's conceptualization of schizophrenia, namely biogenetic or psycho-environmental. And this paper told us that we're quicker to shackle, to net, and to inject people if we see them as having a biological condition or a biogenetic condition, rather than understanding what's happened in a person's life. And Leibowitz and Arns, another person, went on to say that a biogenetic conceptualization of mental illness actually reduces a person's ability to have empathy towards another person. So it's not just a legal framework, it's the very essence and core of who we are, that if I give you a disorder, you are different to me and not as human as me. And there's no place for that in a so-called health system and a health structure, because by the very nature of ideas of health, it's things that we share that helps us learn and grow. So this is the bit I was talking about. This was a TV show on the ABC a couple of weeks ago, and it was called Please Don't Judge. Please Don't Judge, Violent Crime and the Mentally Ill. And I'm going to move on from this slide because I don't really want to leave it on the screen for very long, but I will just touch on why I've brought it up. But this was a TV show that was brought to us by the ABC, a government-funded channel, and talked about the harm and violence and murders caused by people with schizophrenia. Now, I just put it out there. I have a diagnosis in the past of schizophrenia, and I haven't killed anyone. And although that might seem a little bit flippant, it would appear that in 2020, it's still important that I state that so that I don't get misunderstood as a violent risk to society because a label someone gave me many years ago. And there's too many of us in this category. It has to be seized. What I do want to say is that the work of Indigo and many other lived experience survivors have put out a website and an argument and asked for an apology from the ABC. Of course, they haven't been forthcoming with that, but in any meaningful way. But it shows you where we are in the current state. So then we need an alternative. So one day I'm sitting down with my friend Sophie, and I said, you know what? Why don't we see schizophrenia, psychosis, all those labels? Why don't we see those experiences as dissociation? They're a way a person's mind is operating or experience is operating when the environment they're in isn't okay for them to be in another way. And so wouldn't we think that's the similar thing to dissociation? And she said, we were having a chat. And I said, so maybe we should just change the word. And that will help people move away from the nonsense language that we have. And of course, there's a bit more to it than that. But that's where dissociotic came from. So it's from dissociare and psychotic, dissociotic. And I've used these vases and faces most of you will have seen, the Rubens stuff, because this is about shifting or ability to shift perception. And as we know now, people's lives have been full of bad and shitty experiences. It's not that they've got a broken brain or a chemical imbalance. But the challenge that these images give us is that in Rubin's PhD, there was something about how the brain can't hold two images the same when the edges of the images are similar. So we can't sort of hold the images. So we choose a dominant one, and that's where we end up. And I think the same things happen. So we all know that people's lives have had challenges and difficulties, but we've been told they're mentally ill. So we flip between the two and we land on the dominant discourse, which is the mental ill side, and hence the need for change of how we perceive things. So then we can flip back to the 70s, 60s, whatever, and listen to Carl Rogers. And this is a sunset where I live in Adelaide. For anyone who hasn't been to Adelaide, there's lots like this. It's rather beautiful. And Carl Rogers said, people are just as wonderful as sunsets if you let them be. When I look at a sunset, I don't find myself saying, soften the orange a bit on the right-hand corner. I don't try to control a sunset. I watch with awe as it unfolds. And my view and experience of being both in extreme states and with people in extreme states is that it's my role to love and admire and value this human as delivering us an important message, perhaps to the whole of community and society, and certainly not in any way a burden or a problem. So what might be happening? What is dissociotic? Well, dissociotic the description is the experience of animation and giving life to being at variance of companionship to self. So we're busy and active in separating ourselves off from ourselves feeling threatened for survival of self in relationship to interpersonal threat from the other. When I'm in an environment that is threatening to me with people around, I need to not be in that environment. And one way to do that is to go into what has been labeled as this idea of psychosis. And that's what I'm going to explain now. In this diagram, what I'm suggesting here is that psychosis or extreme states is what is in between us as a mechanism for us to connect to, hence the title of the talk. So it's being in connection with what is available is what allows that emergence of the healing that Indigo was talking about, that I would talk about, that so many would talk about. And just to briefly sum up this model, the trauma is not just necessarily the classic signs of trauma, but also the narrative from the Power Threat Meaning Framework, Bernard Guerin's work about bad life situations, anything that causes us to be in a place where we can't respond as we might if that wasn't there. The dissociation, of course, is now used in psychology terms, but it originally had its origins in separating ourselves off, being at variance from something. So it's actually a skillful mechanism that we now describe in psychological terms as we've changed the use of the language there. And the meaning we developed, well, I like to think of the idea of kind of Frankel's meaning or power threat meaning framework meaning, which is talking about much more than intellectualizing, but a much broader sense of meaning across all of who we are as human beings. And I would say it's in the interface between trauma, dissociation, and meaning that it's expressed as psychosis or extreme states. So we can see that those expressions are telling us the story, that behind these expressions is trauma, dissociation, and the way I've made sense of it. And that's what we have to make contact and go into healing. So I'll just run on. This is just to put the same diagram in Langian constructs. The trauma is about ontological insecurity, the insecurity of being. We become annihilated rather than dissociated, but it's a similar sort of process in my view. And so we disconnect and cease to exist from society. And we can't find that human connection. We can look at it through a Freudian lens. I won't bother now, but we can, and I'll send the slides out. So what am I talking about? Well, the difficulty then is that dissociation, and you give me a bit of poetic license, has often been seen as a freeze response. It comes from, we might think of there being an animal that's a threat to us, and then there's a person, and we might fight the animal as a fight response. We're living on a very much a limbic brain in the old times of animals and humans, and so we'd fight the beast that was trying to kill us to survive. We then might, my mouse has stopped, we then might decide to run away. If that doesn't work, we might then freeze, either standing or even go into a dissociation. And here's the need for poetic license. The animal has an innate need to chase down its prey, so it runs past and we survive. This is an unconscious, uncognitively processed intention, but it works really well to survive in those situations. And then we evolved and we've adapted to a new way, a new threat and a new way of perceiving threat. Our brain has a different way of perceiving these things, more nuanced perhaps we might say, but we're actually just responding to the environment that's around us. And of course the threat has changed from an animal to a person. If you fight people, you get arrested or detained, we know that. If you try and run away, we get captured and arrested or detained. We know that if we've got these labels. So we freeze, well, then we're a sitting duck. So if we go to the other way, we might dissociate as we perceive dissociation traditionally. But we've learned if we were to dissociate like that with the threat being from humans, they'd jump up and down on us and try and revive us. So this is the point of my theory, is that we've learned to have an external expression which gets people to move away from us. So that idea of extreme state or psychosis actually moves people away from us and we survive. And that's the kind of basic idea here. So someone's doing this in order to survive, and our invitation is to get into accord with that. So therefore, extreme states are not only understandable, but also a gift and an opportunity for humane connection, bringing messages not only between the two people, but to the whole community, and the opportunity connection for healing in the human-to-human relationship. And I just want to say on this, my own journey of survivorship, I was abused as a child, and at the age of 13, I experienced some extreme states, which in hindsight, I would say I didn't know how to articulate what had happened. So things took over and I looked mad and crazy as I was trying to express that there's something unsafe here. Of course, it was seen as me being problematic and difficult, as was all the other times I had extreme states. But this is what I'm talking about. Maybe had someone listened, I could have told the community that there was a grotesque threat to everybody, and we might have actually been bolder and braver to hear that. And that's what this model's about. So what's our responsibility? Our responsibility when someone expresses these extreme states is to be available to attune into what's happening in that moment. How might my presence actually be necessitating this person to communicate with me in this way and offer me the opportunity not to be frightened or scared, but to get into accord with what they've got to communicate, and for me to embrace that person, in an opportunity for them to embrace themselves. So this is what that would look like. We sit like this. We notice what the threat was, develop right understanding. What just happened in this moment for this person to need to express that? Allow the person to consider, oh, if no one's going to respond badly to me and what happened isn't going to keep happening, then maybe I can think about coming back into connection with that person. We facilitate the person staying where they are or coming towards the other. you don't need to do anything if someone's in an extreme state. The narrative that there's danger and risk is based on the diagnostic nonsense. Actually, people might be telling us, could you just wait where you are until I'm feeling safe enough for us to come further into connection? So we don't go towards the person because we push the fearful person into further liminality and further states of extremeness because they're trying to survive. So what does it look like? We let the person begin to come to us, and in this you can see human connection emerges in the middle. It starts to become a bigger narrative. The trauma, dissociation, meaning and psychosis slowly begins to fade. At this point, we might start sharing the different and same realities. There is no problem with us having different realities of the same moment. And we would call this the coexisting same experience, where we can exist as a mutuality despite having different experiences of the same world, because we all do. Everybody on this connection has that. And we're facilitating a moment when the threat might not exist and the person is no longer liminal. And at that point, a more clearly understood story might be able to begin to emerge. So we can see here the human connection is growing, the trauma, dissociation and meaning is evaporated, and the residual, as the crazy psychiatry likes to call it, psychosis, continues to exist. So we be with the person in the coexisting same experience with our different and unique realities. It allows the evaporation of this so-called psychotic state towards a sense of love and mutuality in the human-to-human interconnectedness. And you can see these are just coming to the end now. What we end up with is that as we move together connected, the difficulties that lay between us are no longer present. They're in people's lives still. We can't get rid of our lives. We don't want to get rid of our lives. What happened to me has given me the wonderful life I have now. So I wouldn't want to rid it, but it doesn't impair me from having connection with other humans now. And that loving space where we can hold and share all that we are together. And what does that allow? Well, it allows connection, a shared experience of human-to-human interconnectedness, and that emerges with right understanding towards authoring and reauthoring the unique human narratives that we have. And the authoring and reauthoring is important because, as Indy was talking about, as many of us survivors talk about, our lives have been authored and they get reauthored with dominance by this nonsensical model of disorder. And this is inviting us to allow a person to reclaim or reauthor the unique narrative of their life. I'm just going to give you a quick case example, or example of two people, because it's beautiful. There was a guy I was working with who was locked in a psychiatric secure ward, and he'd been put in there because he'd got himself, from the Hearing Voices group, he'd got himself admitted to a hospital because he wanted to work with me, but I was based in a different hospital. And so he got admitted on the Friday afternoon and asked them to call me on the Monday morning. And I went and talked to him, and we were chatting to his voices, and he was a beautiful soul. And we got on well. We'd known each other a long time. And then the doctor came along and took him away and said to him, well, you know, what's happening? And he told him that his voices were telling him to kill the doctor. And so the doctor said, I'm going to have to detain you, and you've got schizophrenia. So the guy got up and kicked the door. And at that point, the doctor said, right, call the guards. And they put him in the secure ward. And what was unbelievable was that I'd had almost exactly the same conversation with him in an open area of the ward, but without having any real concerns, because this was a beautiful guy. So later I went to see him in the closed, locked ward with Sophie. And we were sitting, talking to him, chatting with his voices. And he was saying, yeah, my voices are telling me to kill you and bury you under the seat and no one will know. And he was really quite distressed. But there was a warmth between. We knew each other and he knew Sophie, and we were just sitting quietly and the guards were just outside the room. And I said to him, you know, can I just ask you, Mick, do you want to hurt me, or is it your voices want to hurt me? And as I asked him this, he said, oh, Matt, I'd never want to hurt you. And this tear began to roll down his cheek. I feel quite emotional thinking about it. And as we sat there, I stood up and he stood up. I said, what do you need to happen now, Mick? And he said, can I have a hug? And we hugged, and he cried and I cried, and we just hugged and hugged. And shortly afterwards, the guards came to check I was all right because they thought he might be attacking me, when in actual fact, we were just connecting as human beings in a mutuality. And he would tell me 6 months later, you know what was really weird, Matt? When we stood up hugging and I was crying, I couldn't hear any voices. That's the importance of not thinking about diagnosis and nonsense. Thank you for having me. John, I'm finished.
Thank you, man. I'm looking for my unmute button. Oh, wow. Wow. I don't know if you can see the chat, Matt, but there's just such a wonderful reaction to your presentation. The case, I mean, what you're saying is so powerful, and the case study just like, wow. Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I suppose if I can just grab that, you know, for me, that guy that I mentioned to you, it's impossible, isn't it? It's impossible that we're sitting here talking about him as less human than me.
Yeah.
It doesn't, yeah. So thank you for mentioning him. He's a beautiful human. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so impactful also to see your experience of him, like you're right in it right now, and it's just this, such a different experience than he's had from other places. Yeah. Thank you, Matt. Joe, I can see you. You're there.
Lots of love,
Yes.
Joe.
I think you also want to add your thanks, Matt.
Matt, thank you so much. Always so incredibly powerful. Really, really honoured that you're part of the event today. And I met you in Adelaide last year, and then you were at our event in Cornwall in February, where you blew the place. I mean, incredibly powerful presentation in Cornwall. I always thought that was pretty hard to beat, but I think you've gone and done that again today. So thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you being with us.